a World War II veteran, and my uncle was in the 10th Mountain Division, so that's the connection with the 10th Mountain Division that we have. The last time I saw Jim, we were both in Montenegro, and the last time I saw Tammy, we were in Poland in a small, obscure village in the mountains. And the reason why we meet is because the 10th Mountain Division Association is a member of the International Federation of Mountain Soldiers, and we meet with representatives of 11 different countries, and every year the venue changes. So this year it will be in Italy. So anyway, and Jim and I are part of the delegation that is the representative of the 10th Mountain Division Association at these congresses. Okay? So, we'd like to particularly thank the people behind the scenes that made this event possible. Beth, this is she was her great delicious cooking, and Meredith, always my right hand, everything, helping make sure that things go smoothly. And also Lois is she owns this apartment, and without her we would not be able to have this venue. So we really want to thank the three of them particularly, and also Brian for all of his support for the American Legion. Okay, then the proceeds of this event will go to the Landstuhl Military Hospital Program. We support that. We've been supporting this through the 10th Mountain Division. The 10th Mountain Division started this program in 2006 because the 10th Mountain Division was the most deployed division in the Army during the Iraq and Afghanistan operations. So that is how we're connected with the Landstuhl, thanks to the 10th Mountain Division. And the VFW and American Legion support those programs generously. Then also, I would like to mention, besides that, I think we'll go ahead and introduce the program for tonight is, I'm the MC, Commander Timothy Povich will be introducing Colonel Creighton, and I'd like to call also our French Veterans Association, which is Adrian. Adrian, it was a helicopter pilot. He was serving he started his military career like we do in the States in the ROTC program, and he was in the parachutist division. And then he went on and went to Sciences Po, which is one of the prestigious schools here in France, and did his studies. And he also had the good fortune, and he said he wrote this, that he was able to fly a helicopter, a special helicopter, while he was in Mali with the French forces. So I'd like to welcome Adrian, and welcome Adrian. If you could please come up and say some welcoming remarks on behalf of the French Veterans Association. Oh. Well, you could come up here. And Adrian is always with us at events, because part of their mission, he's the first youngest president of the post of the UNC in Issy-les-Moulineaux, and he's always connecting with the U.S. veterans as part of their mission to connect with U.S. veterans. So I leave the floor to Adrian to say some welcoming remarks on behalf of the French for Jim Creighton.
Okay, I will begin in French. C'est un grand honneur, mon colonel, de vous avoir ce soir. We say it's a good pleasure to have your presence here tonight. We say mon colonel in French because I think you know, as a former colonel in Afghanistan, I think we work with French forces, and we don't say colonel, we say mon colonel, so mon is an abbreviation for sir in French, so it's a sign of respect. So France and the United States are strong allies since their independence, but France better, sorry. So in Afghanistan, France and American fought together. We lost 90 soldiers, French soldiers, especially against Taliban and different terrorist attacks. So we're sharing this warfare experience. And today in the French veterans world, we have 65% of our members are serving in Afghanistan. It's a large conflict of France since beginning just after the terrorist attack in September, and just finished in 2013, I think. And we, with French veterans, we saw with sort of this sort of sadness when we saw the retreat of Afghanistan. So it was terrible for French. And today, with the UNC, we are the same. We're working together with BFW because we have the same problems. There are a lot of soldiers who lost their minds in Afghanistan. We have a lot of PTS syndrome. We help them with different procedures of French Ministry of Defense, with the hospital. But in France, we have a great chance to have a social security. So we have our veterans are very, very well taken charge by French state, different to the US. So that's with Tim and Mark. And now in France we're less members than US forces, US veterans. We are in France, UNC is the most important veteran groups. We are more 300,000 members on national level. So in France, but also in outseas departments, for Ireland, Mayotte, for Indian Ocean, or just near Florida, we have Guadeloupe, Martinique, and we receive a big presence of France. So personally, I work a lot with Americans in Mali, with the Marine Corps, because I'm French Marine, so the best corps in France. So I know very well the spirit of American, your spirit of warriors and fighting for winning a fight. Totally different to French. French, we are more politics. In US, you're defending your soldiers, you're defending your sailors, you're defending your forces. Difference to France, we're a lot of dependence on our politicians. And when we left Mali 2 years ago, I remember my colleagues, and especially my colleagues from a special MARSOC, so Marine Special Purpose Corps, and they said, Adrian, it's the fault of the mistake of French people. I said, what? What did we do? And I said, they said, we're losing a war because of politicians. We're losing a war, and we don't. We have a strong camaraderie in fight, especially with the helicopter. When we have support, fire support on American forces, that we have strong links with American. And when we're losing a territory, it's not for soldiers, we're losing a war. And when we're working with a sort of coalition against the terrorists, it's going to be very difficult. Yeah. So, Anne-Marie, I'll let you conclude.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Adrian. Thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure to be here because the Afghanistan is very major conflict for French. And some veterans served with you in Afghanistan. So I thought Colonel Labo, I think you know him very well. Yeah. So, and they cannot be present tonight because it's a Sunday, you know, French. It's a Sunday evening, it's a vacation day. So I represent the French people, the veterans. So thank you, Paula.
Okay, and thank you, Adrian. And this is Lois. I think we have a warm round of applause for Lois. Okay, and so then I would also like to introduce Commander Timothy Povich. He works currently at NATO as a policy and outreach officer in the Paris office. And I took his resume from the LinkedIn, which is really impressive. And it's interesting when you do an introduction, you really realize all the background that someone has that you see a lot and didn't really know. But anyway, he has a strong technical background, nearly 3 decades of military service, strengths in leading, planning, problem solving, and before he was working here in Paris office, he was also a mathematics professor at West Point. I'd like to bring that up because Colonel Jim Creighton is also from West Point and has lectured at West Point. I thought there were some similarities. And also, I thought it was really interesting in his resume that he was a brigadier engineer for the 101st Airborne, and commanded. There were like 3,000, 4,000 people in your lastly, I'd like to conclude with talking about Tim. He went to the University of Texas, and I'm also a Texas Longhorn.
All right.
And Carrie's also from the University of Texas.
Yeah.
So thank you.
All right.
So Tim,
Thanks,
you
Anna
have
Marie.
the floor.
And so Anna Marie asked me to do this because of my connection with Veterans of Foreign Wars as the commander here of Post 605 in the Benjamin Franklin post of the VFW, and also a veteran of the 10th Mountain Division. So it's my honor to introduce our distinguished guest, Colonel Jim Creighton, tonight. Colonel Creighton's 30-year career is marked by exceptional leadership and service. He's done a lot, from commanding units in the 101st Airborne in the 10th Mountain Division to serving as the Assistant Division Commander for the 2nd Infantry Division in Korea. His experience spans critical roles across the globe. For all of us who live here in Paris, in this international environment, as Adrian was getting at earlier, I think his expertise in coalition operations is particularly noteworthy. During his time in Afghanistan, from 2009 to 2011, Colonel Creighton authored plans for expanding coalition forces to 150,000 and developed the civil military campaign plan. He then had this doesn't happen a lot in the Army where you make the plan and then you execute it, but he had the unique opportunity to execute these plans as commander of Combined Team Uruzgan, leading a multinational NATO brigade there in Afghanistan. As a fellow veteran of the 101st and the 10th Mountain Division who served in Iraq, and I'm having worked with NATO for the past 11 years, I can personally attest to the complexities of coalition operations that Colonel Creighton has navigated. The challenges of aligning diverse national interests, bridging cultural differences, and creating unified strategies are something I see in my work in NATO, and it's even harder in a combat environment. So, Colonel Creighton's insights into these challenges, which he'll share with us tonight, are invaluable for everyone working in multinational environments. Colonel Creighton's book, I see a lot of them there, Coalition Leadership, offers valuable insights into challenges of leading diverse multinational teams in complex environments, which is a hard thing to do. And his unique perspective, shaped by planning and executing these operations in Afghanistan, will resonate, I think, with many of us who've worked in the coalition environment and then just have experience living abroad and working in an international environment. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Colonel Jim Creighton.
Thank you, Tim, Anna Marie, Beth, Meredith, Lois, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone foregoing the music festival or recovering from the music festival from last night and joining us here today. It's a pleasure to be here, and I love talking about my experiences and hopefully talking about some of the lessons that we learned. Some of the things we did pretty well, and then some of the things we didn't probably get exactly right, and helping folks learn from that experience. Just to start off, Tim was exactly right. I was the plans officer in Kabul, and my boss, Dave Rodriguez, a big 6'4" paratrooper, comes to me and says, "Jim, I want you to plan for the departure of the Dutch." The Dutch government had decided to pull out of Afghanistan on the 1st of August of 2010, which left a huge gap. There was a gap of about 3,600 soldiers that were just leaving. So, working with many different nations, we came up with a plan. And so we're on the way to brief General McChrystal on the plan, and I was 5 days from retirement. And my boss comes up to me and says, hey, what are you doing? I said, I'm working out. And he goes, well, I want you to stay for another year. And I said, right, you saw my paperwork, I'm retiring in 5 days. And a little bit more discussion, and I ended up going down to Erzgon, talking to the folks down there, about a 3-hour flight away. And I decided to stay, except for I had to call my boss, who's sitting right there, retired lieutenant colonel. And I said, hey, what do you think if I stay another year? And she goes, well, you really only have 2 choices. The first choice is that you stay and do something you've always wanted to do. Your second choice is to come home, in which case I have to live with you for the rest of my life, knowing that you didn't stay. So that decision was pretty easy, and I ended up staying. So what I want to talk about, and the reason I wrote the book was that I think in Erzgon at that time we had a unique opportunity to put together a team. Typically when the United States Army deploys a brigade, they take 18 months to 2 years. They form the team, they train the team, they train some more, they go to the training centers, and then they learn these lessons and then they deploy. Well, I got there on about the 4th of July in 2010. I met my staff on the 6th of July, and on the 1st of August we took command. And that was about the train-up that we had, enough time to sort of get to know each other's names. So as I look back on it, I think it was an exceptionally successful time. And why is that? We had 9 different countries under us. I had a French company, great bunch of soldiers. They were out at Fire Base Anna Joy, out in the middle of nothingness in Afghanistan, and they were basically had the Taliban bottled up into a valley and not able to get out of that valley and expand. I had Dutch residual working for me. I had 1,500 Australians, Kiwis. I had contingents from Slovakia, from Singapore, and a bunch of other different folks. Now, if you can imagine, each one of these forces comes with their own sets of culture, training, equipment, national priorities and expectations. They were assigned to me, but they had 2 bosses. They had their national boss. So when I talked to the Australians, I mean, my deputy was an Australian colonel. And when I talked to him, he was exceptionally loyal to me, but he also had to balance Canberra and what Canberra was telling him. And so trying to understand the dynamics of each one of the countries. Another example, the Australians, they were deployed there to train the army. But we recognized quickly that the police force was the one that was going to maintain security within the villages. That's the police's job. And yet we had no one to help train, coach, mentor the police. And the Australians wouldn't do it. And so I had to find other ways to do that and then leave the primacy for the army with the police. But that was about going in and understanding what the dynamic was for each one of those countries. What were their constraints? What were they? Here's another example, the Slovakians. Oh my gosh. These guys, 6'3", they 2 meters high, built like, brick walls, great infantrymen. Their rules were that they could never leave the post. They could never go outside the wire. Talk about frustration. They've trained their whole lives for this, and now they're guarding a gate. But they were an integral part of the team. They performed a very important task, and you had to help them realize that and feel like they were a part of the team. And so understanding those dynamics, the perspectives of each one of those countries was important in designing the plan. Now, of course, I wrote the plan, right? So now I'm executing the plan. I'm like, dang, that planner, he should have added some of this and added some of that. And so it was do the mission with what you got, and don't complain. just figure it out. And the only way to do that is by number one, treat everyone with respect and dignity. Treat them as though they are the most important part of the team. Because that's the only way you'll get them on side. As a commander, as a leader within a coalition, you have the challenge of establishing a culture of success. Getting everyone on board with a common vision. Where is it that we want to go? Where and they've got to buy into that at the individual level, but also at the national level. And you've got to balance those. If the individual Dutch soldier comes and says, "Yep, that's a great way to go," but the Dutch government says, "We're out of here," then it's just not going to work. So you've got to be able to work your way through that. And the way you do that is meet everyone on their own terms. God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And that is listen to what they have to say. Take that on board and modify your plans so that you bring them on board with those plans. A very difficult situation came up. I had in most of you know this, in the Army you've got what's called a J3, an operations officer, the COO of your organization. I had a kid, he was great. He was technically and tactically competent. He'd had several tours, so he understood the environment, he understood the situation, and he could manage the unit effectively from an operational perspective. But he had, and I don't know why, but he had this arrogance about him. And one day he went to the Dutch and he said, the Dutch had asked to do something, and he said, "No, you can't do it, otherwise I'm taking away all your resources. I'm cutting you off with everything," which was completely inappropriate. So I wrote him down. I said, "Hey, you can't do that." Well, 2 weeks later he came back and my deputy comes up to me and he says, "Hey Jim, he's doing it again. Now he's doing it to the Australians." Well, Australians is 50% of my command. I could not have a situation where my chief of operations was disparaging Dutch, Australian, Kiwi, whatever. So I had to let him go. It was that important that even though this guy was a good guy, he was technically and tactically good, but if it threatened the coalition, then we couldn't do our mission. You had to have that trust within your organization that you weren't just looking out for Americans, that you weren't just focused on the mission, but that you had the whole team under your in your thought process as you did things. And so that was, for me, it was a hard lesson learned, but at the end of the day, that's the way it worked, was by creating this environment of trust. And it's especially important in a coalition, and it's difficult, because oftentimes there is an inherent mistrust. And so you have to face that head on, and you have to build very personal relationships. I'm still, it's 15 years ago, and I still am in contact with many of my staff, that we built this relationship over time to get these things done. The other thing you had to worry about was your systems. Each one of our organizations came with different systems, with different logistics systems, different weapon systems, different operational systems. And so you had to find out what was common and then bring everyone into that common. And if it didn't fit, then you had to know that it didn't fit. You still have to have the same, Australians still had to have the right equipment. They have different guns, but they had to have the right equipment. So, but you had to understand where that equipment's coming from. Is it coming from a combined source, or is it coming from a national source? And so it is understanding in detail the requirements of each one of your organizations and making sure that you account for those requirements. We got into a little bit of a kerfuffle in a valley, and it became a national thing in Australia. We lost an Australian soldier. One of the Australian soldiers earned the Victoria Cross, and we ended up we made an attack and then we had to retreat. And that got into the Australian papers. And they thought that the reason that we lost was because we did not have tanks. And that we needed more tanks, which is pretty much a preposterous notion. But that was Prime Minister Abbott, who at the time was not, he was the Shadow Minister of Defense. He wasn't the Prime Minister at the time. But what happened is that it threatened my organization personally, because you had this national government saying that you needed things that we just couldn't have. And so when Abbott came to visit, it was a concerted effort to show him everything that we had so that he understood the exact dynamic of the fight. That's not something you're ordinarily going to have to do as a brigade commander, as a unified, just U.S. forces or just French forces. Your national assets are sort of going to back you, and you've got a chain of command that goes through. But in this coalition environment, and we talked about it, your political aspect of it is just as important. I mean, you've got to balance both the focus down on a military tactical implications, but then you've got to balance what's going on above you, because you don't want those forces to be pulled or modified or constrained in any other way, which can happen. Another example, I had a battalion commander, good guy, he and I got along well. He commanded about 1,000 Australians, and he had a soldier wounded that was sent back to Germany. And so he talked to his national boss, 2-star Australia. He said, "Hey boss, I want to go visit my soldier in Germany." Well, he didn't tell me. And so what happened was, I found out he was leaving that morning. He said, "Darren's leaving." I said, "What? Where's he going?" "I'm going to Germany." He didn't ask me. And oh, by the way, we've got this, and this going. So I had developed a great relationship with the Australian 2-star. And I said, "Hey boss," I called him up. I said, "Hey boss, what's going on with this?" And he goes, "Oh, Jim, he didn't talk to you." First I heard of it. He goes, "Okay, that's on me. I got it." And he called him, and they worked that through Australian, and he didn't go. But the idea is that your relationships that you have to build are much broader than in a unilateral country that you would have to operate in. Hey, how you doing? Come on. So, operating in a coalition, you take the principles of leadership that we've all been taught as we go through school, as we go into our units, and you expand on those. But really it starts with knowing yourself and having self-confidence. If you go in there without self-confidence, without the belief that you can make this thing happen, people will see right through it. And it'll be hard to build that trust. It'll be hard to make sure that someone says, "Hey, this is someone of integrity that I can trust to take care of me and my soldiers." And so knowing yourself. The other thing is, as Sun Tzu says, is knowing the enemy. Well, the enemy is much bigger in this type of environment, because not only do you have the Taliban, not only do you have the Afghan government that you're working with, but then you've got all these other organizations that have influence on what you're doing. And so that takes a lot more homework It's not like you can just walk in and do it. You've gotta take the time to meet people in their space. You gotta take the time to learn who these people are and how they operate. And by doing that, you can build that trusted environment. So when I talked to Anna Marie today, she said, hey, keep it short because people want to ask questions. And I could go on forever. My wife can tell you I can go on forever. Because I love talking about it, but I really want to hear from you and get at your questions. So when you leave tonight, you learned something and you got your question answered, and I'll do the best I can. So I'm going to cut it off there.
Do you want some water or something to
I
drink?
got one right here. I'll get a drink in a second. But are there any questions, any comments? Tim?
I've got two questions.
Please.
First, one thing, was the language a challenge? Because you get that many nations together, usually English is the common denominator, but you've got Singapore, you've got Slovakia, a lot of nations aren't.
Yeah. So the short answer is, within that coalition, language is not normally a problem. Singaporeans are brilliant. Those dudes are amazing. They're rocket science. I would ask for a product and expect something like this. They would come with 2-3 ring binders of that analysis. They're amazing people. English was not a problem. Where English was a problem, though, was with the Afghans. My interpreter, it took me 2 months to find him. He's a dear friend of mine who lives in Boston. He could translate in 3 languages simultaneously. The dude was brilliant. Because you go in, and the army was Pashtun. So they were primarily speaking Dari. But the Barakside, they were primarily speaking Pashtun. The Barakside tribe was in my main area, and they were speaking Dari. So here I go, I'm trying to negotiate between the army, the tribal elders, and myself. And Daoud, my interpreter, is speaking 3 languages simultaneously as we're going back and forth. Because the army couldn't talk to the tribal elder because they spoke Dari and Pashtun, 2 different languages. So, Lois, did you have a question? No. Okay.
Catching the air.
Yes, ma'am.
So my question would be, what were your principal frustrations in the disconnect on culture orders coming from the States that you would have to carry out on the ground?
Let me rephrase that a
Yeah.
little bit. My biggest frustration was on systems and rotations. So let me give you an example. There was a police station there. The police station was gorgeous, brand new, 70% complete. And when I walked up there, the warlord had his guards on there. And, oh, by the way, in one of the rooms, they were building IEDs. And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And they said, well, we ran out of money. What do you mean you ran out of money? Well, we gave it all to the contractor and he's gone. Well, how long ago was that? Well, I don't know. Like 2 years. Why was that? Well, because the engineers rotate every 8 months. And the engineer portfolio is like this. So the new guy comes in, the old guy, all he wants to go home and see mama. New guy's coming in, he's all hungry, he wants to do different things, so he starts his new projects. Well, you still got this portfolio of projects that haven't been finished. So this is what happened. It fell into this morass. And so the money aspect was very frustrating. Same with, what was her name? She was in the UN Education Organization. I forget who it was. And their advertisement was 166 schools have been completed in Earth. Whoa, touchdown, that's great. No, not at all. Of those 166 schools, probably 100 have never been finished. They've been starting, the money had been allocated, but the way we allocated money was by project. So you're building a house. Are you gonna give the contractor 100% of that money to build a house yet? No, but that's what we did. And then we wondered, why was it that the contractor left with the money? Because he's human. I just gave him all the money. So she comes in and she says, well, where about all my schools? I said, well, did you fly over that school at the end of the runway? She goes, well, yeah, I did. I said, what did it look like? She says, well, it looked like it was about 30% complete. I said, you're right. That's one of your 166 schools. So part of it is the way we did business, and those systems that we did business was very frustrating. And that was more frustrating than I could imagine. Trying to do the right thing, very complex environment, a lot of friction, but
Misaligned metrics.
and this misaligned, and ill-conceived metrics. Yeah. What else?
So,
Yes, ma'am.
so who set the systems? I mean, why would you give the contractor 100% of the I mean, yeah, like, who told him to do that, or how could he even make the decision to do that on his own without filling out
You know,
some form or something? I mean, goodness.
it's easy for us to sit here in Paris and say, how stupid.
No,
Right.
I'm not saying it's stupid.
No, it is stupid.
Well, no, someone can get away with it in the sense of that, yeah, I mean, it's why Americans say, well, the government doesn't work because all you do is spend all this money and nothing happens. Well, who was letting an engineer in Afghanistan pay 100% to the contractor? Not that,
Shit,
not,
no,
not
it-
the engineer, I'm not blaming the engineer, I'm saying like who, how
It's
did he have that authority?
The problem was there were a lot of different factors. So you had one, we want to get in and make a difference. We got a lot of money. There was a boat ton of money. And so we can buy these things. So for example, in the process, we ended up paying interpreters about $600 a month, which seemed like a lot of money, except how much did a teacher make? 70. So now you wonder why you can't find teachers, because they're all interpreters, because they're making 10 times as amount. And so we created that problem within ourselves. So part of it was our desire to get things done quickly. Part of it was this turnover and churn. Systems changed. We had this thing called Commander's Emergency Response Funds, or program, which was money that we could pay to get small things done, to get people working and roads built and this type of thing. But the bureaucracy got in the way with the effectiveness. And so some of it was a bureaucratic requirement. So it's a lot of different reasons.
So,
I look at it, and there's chapters in my book on it because it was very frustrating. I don't think anyone was criminal. I know that people doing it, I don't think they were criminal, but they were caught in a very difficult, challenging situation and just trying to make good things happen, and fell through the cracks. So
And I think one thing I know with SIR funds in Iraq is the people that you're asking to do this are not project engineers. You're asking
lieutenants,
infantry lieutenants
Yeah.
to do project management.
yeah,
And they do a good job, but you're not gonna get professional engineer,
right.
standards. So it's, you deal with what you have, trying to do the best you can.
Exactly. What else, sir?
I served in the State Department Foreign Service Office for about 30 years. I didn't serve in Afghanistan or Iraq, but I knew a lot of colleagues who did. I finished up about the time you were going through all of this in Afghanistan. I can tell you that the word of mouth among Foreign Service officers thinking about going to a PRT, a provincial reconstruction team in Afghanistan, is don't go to one dominated by the American military. Go to one that has a strong multinational component for these very reasons that you've had to wrestle with. Because the perception was, and this has a lot to do with the state DOD military dynamic, never really for cultural differences. The feeling was that the cultural dynamic in these non-US dominated PRTs was going to be much more amenable to getting the work done than people were sent out to do. I'm throwing that out as a preface to question. It has always struck me, my father was in the Navy for 30 years, that military does a lot of very good training, but one thing we don't do well, for the military, at least up until the time he left the service in the early 80s, was thinking about coalitions, thinking about multinational situations in which military forces might be placed. I think part of that was because the U.S. government has traditionally refused to let American military participate in peacekeeping forces, so we don't have sort of this worldwide understanding. I don't know what your experience was going through staff colleges and things like that during your time. Given your experience, given the book, have you detected a change? Is there more of an effort to try to make this part of the curriculum? And do you think that will continue? Because I don't want to throw too large a political bomb out there, but given the mindset of the current administration, is this something, if it has started to change, is it likely to be reversed?
It's a great question, and I'll just keep it to Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, when McChrystal was the commander of ISAF, his deputy was a German, German 3-star, I think. And his chief of operations was a Brit 2-star. And so when General Rodriguez had the ISAF Joint Command, 3-star command, it was a completely international command. As the J5, I had, I can't count, probably 10 different countries working, representatives from 10 different countries working underneath me just within the planning set of the 3-star headquarters in Afghanistan. If you look at Iraq, not as much of a multinational. I mean, NATO took on the mission in Afghanistan. NATO did not take on a mission in Iraq. But I think you talk to most folks and they recognize that pretty much anything we do, if we're going somewhere, it's going to be as a coalition. That's the sense that I get.
Because people have talked about Somalia prior to Afghanistan as having been a case where one of the reasons the peacekeeping mission failed there was because the U.S. military and the other militaries, mostly Pakistanis, couldn't always agree on what it was they were trying to do and how operations were trying to be done.
And I think we've come a long way since Somalia. That's my sense. And the provincial reconstruction team, again, that's relationship based. I had an Australian provincial reconstruction team. Bernard Phillip, one of my dear friends, did not work for me. It was a separate organization under the Australian State Department. He had U.S., he had Norwegian, he had a bunch of different folks, but he had a 55-man security team that was U.S., so it was a multinational organization. But he came up to me on day one, and he said, Jim, I don't work for you, but I'm working for you. And that was just a personal relationship. And we would go into meetings about where are you going to put a school, what are you going to do with this, what are you going to do with that was in his purview. And we walk into the meeting like this, 45 minutes later we walk out like this with a much better solution. There was give and take from both sides. And that was, my relationship with my PRT was exceptional. And we had about, the last count, I think in the back of my book, is $500 million of projects going on, mostly through the PRT and the U.S. Corps of Engineers. So yeah, clearly, and again, that's personality driven. I know other PRTs that they didn't even talk to each other, and it was not as good. But from my perspective, it was a great relationship. I still talk to Bernard on a regular basis. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What years were you in Afghanistan?
I deployed there in 2009, and I got back in 2011, so 2 years.
Okay. You've talked about challenges and frustrations. Maybe you could share what you think were your major accomplishments in that time, or an accomplishment you're proud of?
So mostly, there are several things. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you just talk about building a team, and then the ability of that team to work together toward a common goal, that was a thing of beauty in my mind. I'm biased, but I can be biased. From a on-the-ground Afghan perspective, I thought we were making amazing strides in a lot of different ways. And we could talk about pulling out of Afghanistan and whatever you want, but at the end of the day, I'll give you an example. The first time I flew to Gizab, which is about 150 miles north of us, they had just thrown off the Taliban. The guy named Chief Lowey, it's a dramatic thing. It's sort of a famous Afghan lore story where he had gotten rid of the Taliban. And the first time I flew up there was about 2 months after that, 3 months after that. And when we flew black, we went up there, the bazaar was completely empty. No goods, no food, no nothing. And when we flew back, it was completely dark. You had to fly over the Hindu Kush back down into Turkey. So that was in August of 10. The next time, I went there over a period of time, but the last time I went was in May of 11. So 9 months later. I flew in there and the bazaar was completely packed with stuff. There were trucks coming in and out, there were trucks along the road had been cleared, Taliban were not along the route. And when I flew home that night, there were spotlights of generator / solar lights the whole path down.
So just getting humanitarian aid
So
to
just
the people.
getting it to happen.
Yeah.
The literacy rate when I got there for
Oh, thank you.
boys and girls combined was about 3%.
Literacy?
Literacy rate. So the girls was 0.3 and the boys is about 8%. So combined it was about 3% literacy. And when I left it was 15 to 20%. And so there, you could see incremental progress. Places where I wouldn't go without an up-armored vehicle in full armor, I just walked like it was nothing.
As far as military successes, was it mainly clearing the roads, like you said, of the Taliban so you could get the aid in?
We focused a lot on the roads, but then there were also hot spots. There were some valleys that we took care of, and that helped. But quite honestly, the most important thing to the Taliban, this is another example. So we, in our infinite wisdom, were approached by the leadership of the town upstream. And then this is the Dutch, this wasn't me, this is we, the coalition. The Dutch were approached and they said, hey, we need a dam. The Dutch were like, great, we're good at dams, let's build a dam, boom. So they built a dam. Then I come in and I get all these reports, the Taliban are coming back, There's all sorts of fighting going on. So I go up there, I grab the elders, I said, hey, what's going on? They said they took all our water. So it wasn't the Taliban, it was us. Because we built a dam that took all the water from the downstream guys. And now the downstream guys are all upset. So I said, come on, so some of it's our own problem. Or they say, well, we don't have any water. Wait a minute, we just drilled 200 wells. We drilled each one of those wells at 25 feet. So what happens when you're in a little town with no water and you drill every well at 25 feet? The aquifer goes dry. You have nothing. And so here we are on all our charts, touchdown, we've got 200 new wells. They're good. The reality is, no, they're worse because the government lost the trust. Right? The governor says, hey, I'm going to drill you new wells. And the people say, oh, great. 2 months later, there's no water. So how much trust have you actually built? You've actually destroyed the trust. So, it's a complex environment. What other questions? Sir?
So I'm assuming, given the 30 years you spent culminating in Afghanistan, right, you didn't serve in Vietnam.
Did not.
Given what I would assume to have been some of the similarities, given the situation in Vietnam, at least certainly in the 60s, with pacification and efforts to try to create hamlets where you could protect civilian populations. you ever have opportunities, or did you seek out any of the folks who might have been at your level doing what you were doing in Afghanistan, in Vietnam, to find out from them some of the lessons they might have learned in terms of this kind of unusual mission that you were being given?
In a way. So I talked to like General Vines, for example, Vietnam veteran, and he helped. But I didn't reach out in general. I read a lot about the Soviets to try to figure out. I mean, they were brutal. They killed 1 million Afghans. I mean, it was, and so trying to figure out where they made their mistakes. And so I did historical reading on tribes, on specifically the tribes within my area, on the economy within my area, but in terms of reaching back to Vietnam, that's not as much, just a couple. So,
Yeah, first I'd like to thank you for your service. Kind of looking more at the big picture after you left. What went wrong? President Trump loves to blame President Biden, but I read that when Trump went in his first term, he made a deal with the Taliban, which essentially gave away the country. Do you have any opinion about that?
oh yeah.
Right.
So, like I said, when I left Erzgon, and when we left, my team, we were like, hey, this could actually work. We don't know it's going to work, but we think that we've laid the foundation for it to work. And when they came up with the plan to depart, that was, to me, very frustrating. And it was an emotional day for me, because when I got out, I went to work for an outfit called the East-West Institute, where we did a lot of work in Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, all over the world, but I maintained focus in Afghanistan. And so I had a lot of friends there. So that day, I had 2 phones in my hand, one to General Jones's team and a set of congressional representatives who was getting pressure to get folks out, and then the other folks with the other headset was on with friends of mine who were trying to get into the air base. And so I was like, okay, you guys are at what gate? Yep, okay, you're gonna be there in 15 minutes, okay, Roger. Okay, you guys need to go to this gate in 15 minutes and they'll pick you up. So I was 3 hours on the phone doing that type of thing. So at the end of the day, we had 5,000 troops there. They were up at Bagram, and we had not had a casualty in 3 to 4 years. Now, the money that we spent for them was paying allowance. All the equipment was already over there. So you're going to feed them regardless of what base they're on. So it was a sunk cost, essentially. So the idea that it cost too much, to me, was preposterous, because you had that there. I relate it back to Korea. Armistice was signed in 1953. When did democracy break out in Korea? 1988, 35 years later. They had a series of coups and dictators and this, that, and the other thing. They were all pro-US, so we loved them. And I started 2 years in Korea. I love Korea. It's an amazing place. It's the 11th largest economy in the world. It's the size of Indiana. Tiny little country, just a powerhouse. But it took 35 years to overcome the agrarian, poverty-driven, war-destroyed country that it was. And they have. You go from Seoul to Busan and you're going 104 miles or 204 miles an hour. You're flying. It's an amazing place. So I think Afghanistan could have continued along a positive glide, and that it wouldn't have necessarily broken down like it did. So that's my frustration. Why did it take 6 days and not 6 months or a year or whatever? In my experience, Afghans want to back who they think is going to be winner. And so in Urzgan, when we went in there, the Taliban, they faded out because they saw the government as the winner. And as soon as we left, they saw the government as the winner, and as a loser, and after Ashraf Ghani didn't do us any favor. I met him several times, and it really surprised me that he did what he did. But, question?
Yeah, question. Well, first of all, thank you for what you did at the end, because I'm also on the board of an organization called the World Anti-Extremism Network, which was founded by Khalid Ramisi, who is working with the U.S. for democratization and liberalization in Afghanistan. But the question I have is, as you're watching things that are happening in the world today, let's say with in Ukraine,
Mhm.
and you have some of the questions of there's a lot of American soldiers, a lot of American veterans who have gone into the international legion.
Mhm.
And are you seeing things happening there that just you just want to like call somebody up and say, guys, you should be doing this, or guys, you should be doing that, or
Yeah, short answer, yeah. So I'm a huge, I served in Germany for 6 years, and I've worked with NATO throughout my career, and I am 100% in favor of what NATO does. I had it was in my East-West Institute, I had an office in Moscow, and I've been to Moscow and Russia many, many times. They believe that in 1992 they were robbed of their rightful territory, and it's their political goal to regain that territory. And I don't, anyone that knows, I don't think would dispute that very much. And so, what happened to Ukraine, I think, is number one, is terrible. The Ukrainians are amazing in the way that they've been able to withstand the onslaught from a much bigger country. And I quite honestly think NATO and the U.S. should do whatever we can to help them to do that. I don't know that that necessarily means NATO membership for Ukraine. I think there's a lot of problems with that concept, at least right now. Never in a long time, but right now, no. I do believe that in many respects, NATO has relied on the U.S. more than probably they should have. And so I can understand the president's desire to level that playing field. How he does that, he's got his own way of doing business. And that could ruffle feathers or it could not ruffle feathers. But at the end of the day, I think his intention is right, that we're all in this fight together, and that we should be paying an equal share toward that, wherever, obviously, Lithuania is not going to spend as much money as the United States, but percentage-wise, it should be comparable. And Poland is. Why?
Yeah.
Because they're right on the front line. And so that's what matters. So, one, NATO's vital. Two, I think we should do everything we can to keep the bear at bay. And three, I think that should be a complete team effort where everyone's pitching in appropriately.
We're talking about the political aspects of a lot of this. And I'm thinking of, regards to NATO, you have all these different governments, NATO, all different parties, all different political systems. You referred to it in Afghanistan with the Australian shadow minister coming in, and the problems you have with that. Because the shadow minister is the opposition in the government. Of course, his idea would be to negatively show what's going on, to downplay or to...
Right.
To me, that would be a very frustrating, for me, someone in your position, especially like in NATO. I mean, how do you deal with all these different types of governments, all these changing policies, some trying to make you look bad? That would be very frustrating to me.
It is.
Yeah, just a comment. It's not really a question. It's more of a comment.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, it goes back to what I said about confidence. That you know yourself, you have the confidence in what you're doing and the direction you're going, and then you do your best to communicate your vision, your direction, where it is that you want to go.
Right.
And at some point in time, people are going to say no. I'm in politics right now. I'm a state representative in the state of New Hampshire, and I feel good on a good day. If 51% of people are voting with me, I'm feeling good. And so a lot of it is having the self-confidence to know that not everyone's gonna agree with you, and that's okay. And that when you have the opportunity to compromise and to make a better plan or make something that more people agree to, take that advantage. But at some point in time, you're gonna have to say, no, this is what we're doing. And then you gotta have the self-confidence to do that. And quite honestly, if people don't like it, and you get fired, okay, I did what I thought was right. And it's gonna come to that sometimes. And I've had to make those decisions. But you gotta have the confidence that you understand, because at the end of the day, you do understand your space better than anyone else.
Right.
If you're doing your job, you understand it better. And so, if they disagree with you, that's up to them. But at least you have the confidence to go forward. Yes, ma'am.
Where did you learn to have that self-confidence?
Nature or nurture, ma'am? It's a great question, because I think in the United States Army, they grow you. It is a very defined path, where you start small and you gain success and you gain that momentum. And if you don't gain success, then you're let go. It's a meritocracy. And so as you go up and you have success, that builds more success. You go from 30 guys to 100 guys to 500 guys to 1,000 guys to 3,000 guys, and by the time you get to 3,000 guys, it's like second nature. That's just what you do. It's just, so I think it's a lot of the way you're brought up.
It was
Yeah.
math class at West Point.
What's that?
It was math class at West Point.
10 boards, staggered desks.
I'd like to ask you a question about a broader perspective.
Okay,
Okay. So I was a teenager in Washington DC during World War II.
okay.
I served in Korean War
Mhm.
with many friends in Vietnam. And then we went on to Afghanistan, and if you want, we can go right into what's going on in the Middle East right now.
Mhm.
I heard leaders talk about the necessity to use military force in all of those situations.
Mhm.
And I never heard any United States leader say, we need to do this. Here is our 50-year or 100-year plan for regime change or nation building. Every situation I can think of that I remember, it was, we gotta do this and we gotta do this now because of this, okay? And the only way we can do this is use the military, okay? So it always ends up as the military's job to do what some leader tells us without ever having a clear plan or a national consensus. Now, when you're in your situation, the leadership in Afghanistan is getting orders from the Department of Defense, okay, and from Congress and the President, okay, and sorting all of that out, and when it gets down to your level, you got a mess to deal with. I mean, that's what I hear. That's what I saw. So what is your feeling about not jumping off until we have a clear plan and a national consensus?
I'm going through many examples. You know, for example, in October of 2011, I think we got as close to national consensus as you're gonna get. There wasn't anyone that was gonna say, let's not go get Osama bin Laden in Tora Bora, Afghanistan. But once we got there, then what do you do? And then that's when it got really confusing, because we really didn't know what we were getting into. And I was there. I was there in whatever it was, 03, 04. And it went from, we're gonna get bin Laden, but then we realized that there was no infrastructure. We realized that there was no real government, that the education level was below 10%, and that, you know, you weren't gonna get there unless you educated people, you weren't gonna get there unless you had roads. I mean, so then all of a sudden you had this growing up, and it was going okay, and then we decided, for whatever reason, we decided to go into Iraq. And what happened there was, all the resources that were going to Afghanistan went to Iraq, and Afghanistan fell off the radar. And the Taliban said, whoa, let's go. So that's when they came back, is when we went into Iraq. I do think Iraq was crazy. I don't know why we did that. And I thought that at the time. I was at the war college. So I don't know, you know, some of it is driven by, I have from very reliable sources that was just personal hubris. That was Bush wanting to get back for his dad. And so there's some of that. You know, then there's, you know, each one of those things that you've indicated, you know, Harry S. Truman stopped the communists. So therefore we're gonna go into Korea. It's gotta be done. And JFK, same thing, going into Vietnam, gotta stop the communists. And so there's always a reason. I heard last night, I was on this Channel 24, and they were talking about regime change, and my neck just quivered because it's such a misnomer. You know, it sounds so easy. Oh, we're gonna regime change. What the hell is that? You know, like they're just gonna give up. You know what? Okay, stop. You're killing me. So I think we do get enamored with easy solutions. I had a discussion with my daughter the other night. You mean this doesn't end in 90 minutes with, you know, John Wayne riding in the sunset with Maureen O'Hara? You know, that's the way it's supposed to end. I think a lot of people get their mind in that sort of viewpoint. It's hard. It's hard business. It's expensive, costs lives, and it should be done with a lot more forethought than I think sometimes we do. I'm sorry, long answer, but very good question. So, Tom.
I have a question. You went to Afghanistan from 2009.
Can you speak up, please?
Sorry. You went to Afghanistan from 2009 to 2011, right? And the mission of the U.S. in Afghanistan ended in 2021, something like that. When you left, what was your feeling about the mission? And did you anticipate that it would end in the next couple of years, or maybe more than 10 years? And we talk about frustration, but when you left Afghanistan, do you believe that you had a mission accomplished, or do you feel that?
Mission accomplished. Okay, first of all, I do believe that we had gone on this curve where when we went in there, it was get bin Laden. And then there was this thought about a Swiss-type democracy of some sort, you know, that you're going to have this perfect democracy develop. And I think we disabused ourselves of that notion. And so I think that by the time I left in 2011, we had come to a pretty good understanding of it's a long slog over a long period of time. And it's not going to be a curve like this. It's going to be a straight line that rises. And we're along that curve. And I felt like we were. I believe that if we had stayed, we would have continued to improve. The Taliban would have continued to be marginalized, and that Afghanistan, there's estimates that Afghanistan is sitting on about $3 trillion worth of rare earth minerals, and just enormous wealth that you can't get out because there's no infrastructure and but it's there. And so there was economic growth. The agriculture there is really amazing. Almonds, watermelons, and there's just an amazing opportunity there. And so when I left, and I got on a C-130, and I flew out of Arizona, I'm thinking, you know, it was hard, but violence is way down, the bazaars are all full, lights are coming on, and the people are beginning to trust their government. And that's in my little foxhole.
And maybe to go further,
Please.
Sometimes, you know, when you enter into the conflict, you don't know what would be inflection point? As you said, maybe shall I quit? Or if I continue, maybe it will make it worse. Okay? So if you know the time in 2011, it was somehow at the point where things seem to improve. Is there anything in the politician or in the military mechanism that say, okay, now mission accomplished, let's move out?
No, that's not the type of war, it wasn't World War II. That was the type of war like, okay, we're there, we broke it. Now we gotta fix it. And it's a long-term thing. And I talked about Korea, we're still in Korea. And so, I don't think it was game's over, let's go home. It was never gonna be that way. Not successful. And what my frustration was, and Bush had said it, and I believe Obama said it at one point in time, was, okay, we're in for the long haul. Okay, well, the long haul is more than one presidential term. The long haul, and the problem is, you know, it's, you got new people coming in and they get tired of it and they don't wanna do that anymore. It's a political decision at the end of the day. But straight up from a military perspective, I mean, we would have had to been there 30 or 40 years. But I don't think I didn't think the cost is that great. We weren't losing people. We were keeping the Taliban at bay. And all the infrastructure and stuff we needed to maintain that force was already there. So it wasn't an additional cost. I think cost is a red herring. I don't think that's a valid argument for pulling out.
Okay, one more question, and then we're going to George.
I'd love to ask one.
Yeah,
I would like to thank you again for your interview last night
thank you.
on Channel 20.
George works for France 24, and he was able to organize an interview at the last minute.
Thanks to Colonel Creighton, as well as the team that we had, because it seemed like everything went seamless, aside from the landscape, but other than that, it was a brilliant interview. I want to tell you again. What I loved about it was there was no speculation. It was historical perspective, you know, context, and at the very end as well, how you said that had it been possible to stay longer, democracy could have taken it. It's not one of those things you go in and you get out and they just discover for themselves, okay, yeah, let's pass the torch or something like that. My question to you is, had it, and maybe it would have never been able to propose it that way, had it been presented as Marshall Plan, you know, World War II, this is going to have to be something like this for this to work out, and this will take decades and decades, not in a war footing, but more in a nation building kind of footing, and democracy takes a long time, generations take root. They're already having, you know, girls were in schools, women are having careers, and in 1 week, it's all gone after 20 years.
Yeah.
And this is my question to you as well. First, because we had former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, a few days before you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what he said, and it's not super provocative because it is, but it came from him, so I feel that I can communicate this. He said that the only way to put an end to the nuclear threat of Iran is for regime change. The only way to have regime change is to have a joint operation between U.S. and Israel. And he said, and it's probably not going to happen. And then he said, in any case, the U.S. hasn't won any war in the past 75 years. And he didn't just say that on France 24, he said that on other media as well. My question to you is, was that kind of like an invitation for Trump to be like, you got Ehud Barak, the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak said the U.S. has not, and not just on France 24, he said the U.S. has not won any war in the past 75 years. Do you think that was planting a seed where Trump would have the opportunity to win the first war, you know, in 75 years and go with Israel? I'm just at, you know what I'm saying? When he didn't say that just on one channel, and there was a reason why he said it. And you know, it's also to be subjective. You could say, like you said yesterday. I'm sorry.
Okay, quick answer, because we want to, Lois is saying we've got to.
Oh, sorry. So the Marshall Plan and also the, what, and
Okay,
Barack said
quick
just,
answer.
Yeah.
I don't know, far be it for me to get into my president's mind. That's a scary thought. So
I'm sorry. I know speculation, but
I'm sure he listens to all sorts of different things, and that might have had something to do with it. And I'm sure he talks to Netanyahu a lot as well, so. And then, you know, the Marshall Plan took a long time, years to develop, and we're sitting here in this beautiful place as a result of a lot of generosity on everyone's side, a lot of hard work, so I appreciate that.